वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् श्रीन्वतां स्वकथा कृष्णा पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तनः हृदयान्तस्थो हि अभद्राणि विदुनोति सुहृत्सतम् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवा भगवते उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 26, verses 25 and 26. Verse 25. Vaktram nate vitilakam malinam viharsham samramba bhimam avimristam apetaragam pasyesta pastestanvapi suchopahatau sujatau bimbadaram vigata kunkuma pankaragam. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. My dear wife, until this day I have never seen your face without tilaka decorations, nor have I seen you so morose, without luster and or affection, nor I have seen your two nice breasts wet with tears from your eyes, nor have I ever before seen your lips which are ordinarily as red as bimba fruit without their reddish hue. Every woman looks very beautiful when decorated with tilaka and vermilion. A woman generally becomes very attractive when her lips are colored with reddish saffron or vermilion. But when one's consciousness and intelligence are without any brilliant thoughts about Krishna, they become morose and lusterless, so much so that one cannot derive any benefit despite sharp intelligence. Verse 26. तन्मे प्रसीद सुहृदा कृता किल्बिषर्ष्या साईराम गतस्य मृगयां व्यसनातुरस्य कदेवरं वसगतं कुसुमास्त्रवेगा विस्रस्तपौंसं वसति न भजेत कृत्ये. Translation. My dear queen, due to my sinful desires, I went to the forest to hunt without asking you. Therefore, I must admit that I have offended you. Nonetheless, thinking of me as your most intimate subordinate, you should still be very much pleased with me. Actually, I am very much bereaved, but being pierced by the arrow of Cupid, I am feeling lusty. But where is the beautiful woman who would give up her lusty husband and refuse to unite with him? Both men and women desire one another. That is the basic principle of material existence. Women in general always keep themselves beautiful so that they can be attracted to their lusty husbands. When a lusty husband comes before his wife, the wife takes advantage of his aggressive activities and enjoys life. Generally, when a woman is attacked by a man, whether her husband or some other man, she enjoys the attack being too lusty. In other words, when one's intelligence is properly utilized, both intellect and the intelligent person enjoy one another with great satisfaction, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 7.9.45. यन् मैथुनादि गृहमेदि सुखं हि तुच्छं कंदु कंदुयानेन Karayor Iva Dukkha Dukkham. The actual happiness of karmis is sex life. They work very hard outside the home to satiate themselves after their hard labor. They come home to enjoy sex life. King Puranjana went to the forest to hunt. After his hard labor, he returned home to enjoy sex life. If man lives outside the home and spends a week in a city or somewhere else, at the end of week, he becomes very anxious to return home and enjoy sex with his wife. This is confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam Yanmaitunadi Gruhamedi Sukanihi Tucham. Karmis work very hard simply to enjoy sex. Modern human society has improved and the materialistic way of life simply by inducing unrestricted sex life in many different ways. This is most prominently visible in the Western countries. Thus end the Bhakti and the purports of fourth canto, 26th chapter, the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled King Puranjana goes to the forest to hunt and queen becomes angry. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Yatanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauramani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pachatya Deshatarane Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadara Sivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for joining this Srimad Bhagavatam. Thank you for the opportunity to beautify myself. And as Prabhu cannot join, we try to summarize from the Prabhupada's translation and purport. And if anybody wants to chime in and give their realization, please do so. So we are these are the last two verses of chapter 26, titled Puranjana hunts in the forest. It indirectly the jiva performance forbidden acts under ignorance. That is what Puranjana um, doing in this chapter, as explained. And he has a desire to hunt, and he goes influenced by demonic propensities, and obviously as per scriptural regulations, one cannot kill the animals, you know. But the king was too attracted to eating the flesh, um, and Puranjal can kill many animals, and then Puranjal returns to home and appeases his aggrieved wife. So, and I think last few verses it's talking about what Puranjana activity and what is the spiritual significance. And coming to the verse in 25, and this work describes that how Puranjana's strong attachment to his wife. He was so captivated that he constantly served her, followed her desires, could not act independently, and his intelligence is and decision making both were completely controlled by her influence. And the essence is the soul, when overly attached to the material desires, here symbolizing as a wife or spouse, becomes bound and loses its independence. And in the verse 26, it explains that, because of his deep attachment and dependence dependence, Puranjana gave up his own will, lived only for her pleasure, and he could not act without her consent, being completely subordinate. So this excessive attachment leads to bondage where one lives only to satisfy material desire and forgetting their real spiritual purpose. So, and Prabhupada, explained in the purport, one second. And he also mentioned the words, 7, 9, 45. It talks about, sex life is compared to rubbing the two hands to relieve an itch, but Gruhamedis, so-called Gruhastas, you know, uh, who have no spiritual knowledge, think that this itching is the greatest platform of happiness, although actually it is a source of distress. So the Krupanas, the fools who are just the opposite of Brahmanas, are not satisfied repeated sensuous enjoyment. Those who are dhira, however, who are sober and who tolerate this itching are not subject to the sufferings of fools and rascals. This is from Bhagavatam 7, 9, 45. So here, Prabhupada explained in the purport, right, materialists think that, sexual indulgence is the greatest happiness in the material world, but therefore they make elaborate plans to satisfy their senses, especially. And then this is generally found everywhere, especially, it's found in Western countries or, developed countries. They think that everything they do is for material opulence and eating or mating and defending. So that's where they put more of their effort, money, and all the resources. Whereas they have a luxury to use their life for the service of the Lord, and focus on spiritual aspect. And this is usually, this life of enjoying the senses, has not made anyone happy. Even the hippies, when who has given up all their materialistic comfort of their fathers and grandfather, cannot give up their sexual happiness of sexless. Such persons are described here as krupanas, misers. The human form life is great asset, for in this life one can fulfill goal of existence. Unfortunately, because of lack of education, culture, and people are victimized by false happiness, and that's where Prahlad Maharaj therefore advises that one not to be misled by civilization of sense gratification, especially not by sex life. Rather, one should be sober and avoid sense gratification and be Krishna consciousness. So the lusty person who is compared to foolish miser never gets happiness by sense gratification. So the influence of material nature is very difficult to surpass. But as stated in Krishna's Bhagavad Gita 7:14, Mameva e prapajyante mayamitam tarantite. If one voluntarily submits to the lotus feet of Krishna, he can be saved very easily. So in difference to lower grade of happiness, Yamunacharya says, in this connection, I think I'm just reading from 7:1945. Since I have been engaged in transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him, whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit it at thought and my lips curl with distaste. So Yamunacharya had formerly been a great king who enjoyed the sexual happiness in various ways, but since he later engaged himself in the service of the Lord, he enjoyed the spiritual bliss and hated to think of sex life. If sexual thoughts comes to him, he would spit with disgust. So yeah, in the summary, these two verses talking about how Puranjana had a strong attachment to his wife, and with his attachment, he lost his independence, and he become bound to his desires, and like because of his deep attachment and dependence, he gave up his own will and lived only for her pleasure, and he could not act anything without her consent and beingly over subordinate. So here, instead of serving Krishna and to a uh, spiritual process or follow the spiritual service, they're into full of like material desires and satisfying the material desires because it's easily full of ignorance. So that's why with all this allegory, what we can realize or learn is that how one is fully entangled in this material life different ways, and there is no end to miseries also at the end, because all these material desires and material happiness only end up with the frustration or unfulfilled desire or unsatisfied desires, because this material desires and material fulfillment is not eternal, and that is what it's meant for. But whereas the spiritual desires and spiritual uh, happiness is eternal, and even though we can taste parts and bits and parts as and when we conduct our life in sanatan way or dharmic way, but the more and more we fully surrender and take a shelter at lotus feet and doing all the spiritual activities, I think we can slowly uh, engage more into taste the spiritual bliss and also ultimately go back home to the Godhead. With that, I can conclude, and if anybody want to share any of their realizations,
Hare Krishna.
otherwise,
One other thing, Prabhu, is that, here in this allegory, we also learned that the jiva, the tendency to enjoy, when he was going out hunting, it was showing that how they go against the dharmic principles, and also how, all the women hunting and everything. So that was Jiva's tendency to enjoy. And now, even with his wife, also, it is the tendency to enjoy. So I think that's something very much intrinsic for the Jiva's characteristic, like wants to enjoy, whether it be outside or inside, like dharmic or adharmic, but really the soul always wants to enjoy. So that's something, again, tomorrow when we hear the full summary, we'll see the whole allegory come into place. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for joining. I think we can